In the last video, we have seen how to use various conditional control structures in Python. In this video, we'll see how to use various loop control structures using Python. So let's try to understand what are loop control structures. So loop control structures can be used to repeat certain statements for certain number of times or till the condition is satisfied. Say for example, here in this flowchart, I have a condition, and when the condition is evaluated to true, then the statements in block 1 will be executed, and after execution of the statements in block 1, again the condition is tested, and if it is true, then again the block of statements would be executed, and this will be repeated either for certain number of times, or this can even be repeated until the condition is true. So whenever the condition is evaluated to false, then the statements in block 1 will be skipped and the statements in block 2 will be continued for execution. So here block 1 statements are repeated in a loop, so as long as the condition is satisfied, right? So to satisfy these kind of situation, we use special kind of control structures known as the loop control structures. So in Python, we have while and for keywords to support the loop control structures. So let's try to understand how do we use the while loop in Python to iterate a set of statements for certain number of times. So if you observe, the general form of the while loop is so while, expression, and the set of statements. So whenever the expression is evaluated to true, then I want to execute these statements that are placed inside the while loop. So if you observe, there should be an indentation between the while and the set of statements placed as part of the while loop, and this kind of expression is used to repeat the set of statements, and the repetition can happen in two different ways. So like in the first case, we can repeat these set of statements as long as the condition is satisfied, or even we can repeat the statements for certain predefined number of times. In these two cases, we can use the while loop. If you consider the working of this while loop, so first the expression is evaluated, and whenever the expression is evaluated to true, then the statements that are part of the while loop would be executed, and this is repeated as long as the expression is evaluated to true, and once the expression is evaluated to false, then the statements that are placed as part of the while loop will no more be executed, and the remaining statements will be continued for execution. So now let's see an example that uses the while loop. So let's consider this variable I, which is assigned initially to 0, and I will be using this I as the loop variable. So because the condition will be dependent on the value available in the variable I. So let's assume n is another variable which is having some predefined value. If you consider this expression while I less than or equal to n, and I want to repeat certain statements as long as this condition I is less than or equal to n is evaluated to true. Say for example, assume n value is predefined as 5, and our initial value of I is 0, and 0 is less than or equal to 5. So the condition is evaluated to true, then the set of statements that are part of the while loop would be executed. And if you consider this, so I have two different statements as part of the while loop. So print I value, and then I is incremented by 1, I equal to I plus 1. So these two statements are placed as part of the while loop. So first, the expression is evaluated, I is less than or equal to n, that is 0 is less than or equal to n, and it is evaluated to true when n value is 5. Then as the expression is evaluated to true, the statements that are part of the while loop would be executed. So first you are displaying the I value using the print I, then I value is incremented. So after displaying I value is incremented to 1. Earlier it was 0, now it is incremented to 1, right? So then again, after executing the statements that are part of the while loop, the condition is evaluated. So now the condition would be 1 less than or equal to 5, as I value is incremented to 1 and n value is predefined as 5. So 1 less than or equal to 5, again it is true. So now again the statements are repeated. So you are printing the value of I, and then I value is incremented to 2. So now expression is evaluated again, so that is condition you are testing again. So 2 less than or equal to 5, again it is true. Again the statements that are part of the while loop would be executed. So this is how the set of statements can be repeated as long as the condition is true. And whenever the condition is evaluated to false, in this case when I becomes 6 less than or equal to 5, the condition becomes false. In that case the set of statements that are placed inside the while loop will no more be executed, and the statement that is placed after the while. So if you consider here print end of code, so that statement is placed after the while loop, so that statement will be executed. So that's how you can use the while loop to repeat certain statements as long as the condition is true. If you consider the output in this case, so it would be initially 0 because you are getting I value as 0 initially and 0 less than or equal to n. Whenever n is positive it is true. So you are displaying I value, you are getting 0 and I is incremented. So now again condition is tested 1 less than or equal to n, it is true, then 1 is displayed and again I value is incremented to 2. Now condition is tested 2 less than or equal to n is true, then 2 is displayed. Then again it is incremented 3 is less than or equal to n, it's true. So that's how it is repeated as long as you get the value of n. When n value is printed, in that case I will be incremented to I plus 1, that in that case I becomes n plus 1. So n plus 1 is less than or equal to n is false, and then you are coming out of the loop, and then your final print statement end of the code will be displayed. So that's how you can use the while loop to repeat certain statements as long as the condition is true. So now let's see how we can use the infinite loops. So first try to understand what infinite loops are. Infinite loops are the loops which are executed forever. So in this example, every time you are in the iteration, so you are moving towards close to the final condition, right? When n value is 5, your condition will be tested every time you are in the loop, and your loop will be repeated for 6 times, right? So 0 to 5. Whenever I value becomes 6, then you are coming out of the loop, right? Because n value is 5. So that's how, depending on the n value and I value, you are repeating the number of statements, and finally whenever the condition is false, you are coming out of the loop. So assume that so your condition is not at all evaluated to false. In that case what happens? So such kind of loops are known as the infinite loops. Infinite loops are the loops which executes forever without any terminating condition. So such loops are known as the infinite loops. So consider this example, while true. So instead of having any other expression, I am having true itself as an expression which is always true, right? And while true, print Python. So as part of the while loop, I have single statement that is printing the Python word. How this works is, initially the condition is evaluated to true and you are displaying the Python. Then again the condition is evaluated, which is again true, and then again Python would be displayed. Again the condition is tested, it's again true. So you are not at all changing the expression in the while loop, right? And it is always evaluated to true, and you are always displaying the message print Python, right? So indefinitely you are repeating the loop as it is nowhere meeting the false condition, right? So such kind of loops are known as the infinite loops. And you should be careful while designing the loops. So there may be a chance that your design falls into the trap of infinite loop. So similar to having the nested if structure, we can even have the nested while. So while discussing the conditional control structure, we have seen how we can nest the conditional control structure, how we can have one if inside the another if control structure, right? So now let's see how we can have one while condition inside the other while expression, right? So if you can write one while inside the other, such kind of structure is known as a nested while loop structure, right? A loop inside the other loop. And this can be extended to any number of levels. You need not to restrict to 1 or 2 levels. You can have that kind of nesting of loops to any number of levels. So consider this general form of having the while loop, while expression. So there is a statement followed by, so in that gap I can have a while loop as part of the while loop, and then followed by another set of statements. So this is the normal while loop itself. I want to make this as the nested loop. When I place one more while loop as part of this while loop, then it becomes a nested loop. So if you observe here, so while has become now nested while loop. So consider an example of having the nested while loop. So here this is the code which is having the single while loop without having the nested. Now I am going to place another while loop as part of this while statement. So if you can place these kind of loops, one loop inside the other loop, so such loop statements are known as the nested loops. So here if you consider the working of this, so I value is initialized to 0, then while I less than or equal to 5 it's true, then j value is 0, j is initialized to 0, then the condition is tested while j less than or equal to 5, which is also true, then you are printing the message I comma j. So now, so with the I value and j value 0 0 are displayed, and then j value is incremented to j plus 1. So now j becomes 1. So with that j value and your I value is fixed to 0, your internal while loop will be executed. So the inner loop executes as long as j is less than or equal to 5 with your I value is fixed as 0, right? And then after that your inner loop executes with the I value is set to 1. So that is how your nested loop works. Now let's see how we can use for to design the looping control structures. So let's have the general form first. So general form is for variable in iterable then set of statements. Here the variable is the loop variable and in is the keyword, for is the keyword, and iterable is, so always you need to use the iterable with the for loop. Here the statements in the for loop would be executed for certain number of times, and this number will be decided based on the number of elements in the iterable. So if you have 100 elements in the iterable, then your loop would be executed for 100 times. So that's how you can use the for to repeat a set of statements for a specific number of times. Your set of statements would be executed for every value in the iterable. So how it works is you will get one of the value to the variable, and with that value in the variable you will be executing the set of statements. Then the second value in the iterable will be copied to the variable, and with that variable you are repeating the set of statements. So that is how for every value in the iterable the set of statements would be executed. Here the iterable indicates an object that can be iterated over. For example, you can consider list, tuple, string, dictionary. So these are all considered as the iterables. Even the set also can be considered as iterable. So let's see how a for loop works. So here this is the general form of the for loop. So here what happens is, first if the iterable contains any expression, then first that expression is evaluated, so which results in an iterable, and with that iterable, so the loop will be executed by getting one of the value to the variable. So for every element in the iterable the statements would be executed. So let's see an example. So here I am using for loop with a string. So what happens here is, so with every character in that string, the statements inside the for loop would be executed. Here as part of the for loop I am just displaying the variable letter, and letter gets one of the character from the string. For the first time it gets A, for the second time it gets E, third time I, O, U, so on and so forth. So till you reach the end of the string, you will be getting one of the letter from the string to the variable letter, and that letter you are displaying. So that's how you will be getting vowel A, E, I, O, U when you execute this code snippet. So now let's see how we can use a list with the for loop. So with the for loop we can use a list where the list contains 3 elements 1, 2, 3, and every time you repeat the loop, first I gets the first value of the list, that is 1, then I gets 2, then I gets 3. So if you have more number of elements in your list, then so till your last element is copied to I, with those values the list of statements as part of the for loop would be executed. Now let's see how we can use the method range with the for loop. Instead of using the list or the string or the dictionary, so we can use the method. So first this range of 0, 3 is evaluated, which results in an iterable, that is a list. So then range of 0, 3 actually returns a list with the values 0, 1 and 2, right? And the set of statements would be executed for every value in that range. That is, with 0 getting with the value of 0 copied to I, the statement would be executed, then 1 is copied to I, then 2 is copied to I. So that's how the set of statements would be executed with every value in the list. So that's how you can use a for loop to repeat certain statements for every element in the given iterator. So now let's see how we can nest the for loop, similar to how we nested the conditional control structures or even the loop control structures also. We have seen how to nest the while loop. So now let's see how we can nest the for loop. So what is nested loop structure? One loop inside the other loop. So here I have a for loop structure. If I can bring one more for loop as part of this for loop, then I can say that the for loop is nested. So this is how I am going to place a for loop as part of the other for loop. So now it becomes a nested loop structure, and it can be extended to multiple levels. It need not to be restricted to one level. Again, inside the inner for loop, I can have one more for loop also. Like that, I can extend that to multiple levels. Now let's see an example how we can use the nested for loops. So for I in 10, 20, 30, 40, actually the outer for loop repeats for every value in the list, outer list, and that value is copied to I. And if you consider the inner list, which is marked in red color, so for every value in the list 100, 200, 300, 400, so the statement would be executed, and every time you repeat that loop, j gets one of the value from the list. So first I value gets 10, then with every value in the inner list, the statement I comma j would be executed. So like that, we'll be getting the output as 10 comma 100, then 10 comma 200, 10 comma 300, 10 comma 400. Then after completion of one complete iteration of the inner for loop, then the outer loop variable would be getting the updated value, that is I gets 20. So with that value, again the inner loop would be executed. So with I value as 20, so I will be repeating the loop as 20, 100, 20, 200, 20, 300 and 20, 400. So that's how I can have one loop nested inside the other loop. So far we have seen how to use various conditional control structures and the loop control structures. So Python supports the conditional control structures and the loop control structures also. So conditional control structures basically allow us to select one of the possible ways of execution, whereas loop control structures are used to repeat certain statements for predefined number of times or as long as the condition is true. Now I hope you understand various control structures that are supported by Python and their usage. So by this video, it must be clear for all of you, like where to use the conditional control structures, where to use the loop control structures.